over the last year, our range has kind of narrowed down so that it's very close to home. Specifically, I live in New Westminster, so I have spent the last year photographing in and around my home here in New Westminster in about a 10-block radius. So over a year, you start to be challenged to find new ways to photograph very, very familiar places and streets and buildings. So some of the strategies that I use to keep things interesting or different in a very familiar environment is using techniques like long exposure. So you get light trails at night particularly, using double exposures to create a new look of a place, and sometimes a combination of those things. So tonight we're down by the Anvil Center, and I have brought my trusty companion Mikhail with me. And what we're working on tonight is setting up a double exposure, with the first exposure being a long exposure. So I think I'm using about an 8-second shutter speed for the initial shot so that I get nice light trails on the traffic. There's not a lot of traffic, it's later in the evening, so I do have to wait for something exciting like a bus or a tow truck that has lots of lights and makes for an interesting light trail. Then the second exposure, we're increasing the shutter speed a little bit, increasing the ISO so that we can increase the shutter speed without losing a lot of the detail, or so we can increase the shutter speed. And then Mikhail is walking into the scene, so there's a little bit extra detail in the scene. So the camera, we can just have a look here. The camera's on a tripod, so each shot is I'm not moving the camera between the shots. So the first shot is a slow shot of light trails and the traffic. The second shot is exactly the same composition, it's just the camera settings are different so that I can catch the movement of Mikhail walking. So let's see how that turns out and if we get an image out of this. The first shot I took was a test shot of Mikhail walking so that I could get a sense of what the settings needed to be for that action shot. They needed to be a little bit more dynamic than the long exposure shot. So this first shot, he was walking away. The settings are pretty good, so I had a sense of what my shutter speed needed to be so that he wasn't just a blurry mess, but he wasn't positioned very well. Nonetheless, I decided that that was the composition for the shot. I wanted the light stand in the shot, the street traffic, and in the next shot I would want him to be a little closer to the left so that he doesn't blend into the building quite the way he does here. So this was the first shot just to test the settings. The second shot I set up was, as I mentioned before, a long exposure, about 8 seconds. I had to do several of these. Really, you need to wait until something comes by that has a lot of lights. Like I mentioned, a tow truck does a good job of that, a city bus, those sorts of things, so that there's a little bit more action in the shot. So in this next shot, a tow truck did indeed go by, so there were pretty good light trails. However, in the second image that I layered over top, I kind of caught Mikhail in a little bit of a goofy stride, and so his stride looks a little bit off, and he looks like he has an apartment building kind of sitting on his shoulders there. He's kind of blended into the image in a weird way. So the shot, now I know that the shot, this is what I want from the shot, I just need him to look a little different in it. So this was another test shot, really. The shot that I settled on as being kind of the shot of the night is this third one. In the long exposure shot, I actually asked him to sit very still on the bench, so he's actually in this shot 2 times. You might see him on the bench there, and then also see him walking. The composition feels a little bit different because he is a little bit, he's positioned slightly different, and he is more blended in, but not in a way that has, a building sitting on his shoulders. He's more blended in, but the way the human eye sees an image, or the way your eye sees a human form in an image, even though he's blended into the building, and you can immediately tell that that's a human form, and so that's where your eye is going to be drawn in that image. I also, in this last image, I really like the way the light trails and the reflections and the lines in the image all lead towards that human form, so your eye knows immediately where to go. So that was the final image of this exercise, and the one that after we got this image, we packed up and went home. So this is just an example of a way that you can come back to a scene that's familiar and that you've shot many times, and just find a new way to see it. If you follow my Instagram account, my New West Photo Walk account, you'll see that I shoot down around the Anvil Center, around Columbia Street, a lot over the last year, and there's many images there, and you can see they're all different interpretations of the similar location.